Clothing is often created for a special occasion, which absolutely must include the taking of a photograph or two. Pretty as a picture is an old-fashioned phrase that my grandmother used to say. There was a time that photographs were very rare, and from looking at my antique collection of photographs, each person was dressed in his or her Sunday best. I wonder if those photographs were the origin of the pretty as a picture phrase. We have techniques for you today that will add that picture-perfect detail to the clothes that you create. Welcome to my sewing room. I am so thrilled to have as my guest today my dear friend and business colleague, Louise Cutting. Louise is the owner and designer of Cutting Line Designs Patterns. Louise, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. I'm glad to be back.
I can't wait to see what you have for us.
Well, today we're going to kind of play with a collar. And
I like
we're going
it.
to switch it so that we're getting rid of some seams. And I want to start with, now this is the way collars that you normally find in patterns, that you'll either have a complete length collar, or I'm going to chop this one in half because we're going to use it anyhow, or you'll have half a collar. Oftentimes you'll open up your pattern and you'll see a collar like this. It'll say cut 2 on the fold, or if you have one that looked like the whole collar, it'll say cut 2 and then cut the interfacing. Well, we're going to cut them apart. If you have a collar that looks like this, if you have a collar that looks like that, you're going to want to make a copy of it and have it exactly the same size. Now you're going to need to find your 5/8 inch stitching line. This is the front edge of your collar, and what you're going to do is marry those two together and tape them so that you end up with a collar that looks like this. Here is your center back fold. You're going to be cutting one of these collars. Here's going to be your front edge, and we've added a 5/8 inch seam allowance again in the center back. So that's your whole collar. Now, we're going to cut both our collar and our interfacing. We're going to clip at the top and the bottom, and we're going to clip at the center back. I'm going to remove my pins, and when I undo this collar, you're going to see something that looks very unusual. Here is our entire collar. And you're going to think that you did something wrong when you see that.
Hold it up and let's just hold it up here. This is so peculiar looking.
That's your whole collar.
I love it. There's your collar.
That's your collar.
That's a big neck.
That is a big neck. And you normally think that you've done something wrong.
Okay.
Now, what you're going to want to do is press your interfacing completely along your collar. And now what I've done is I've used a lighter weight interfacing and
a fusible interfacing.
Fusible interfacing, and make sure that the fusible is fusible side down. Ask me how I know that. And I use silk organza as a press cloth.
Ooh.
Silk organza, you can see through it, you can mist through it, and you can steam through it. And if you hand me the yarn.
I could hand you that.
Okay. Now what we want to do is press, and 10 seconds in every spot will fuse the interfacing to the iron, or excuse me, fuse the interfacing to your fabric. I'm going to give you that guy back. Now, here is our collar that we have interfaced, and what we're going to do is fold it back into its original position and sew it down the center back. It takes longer to do the tissue paper rearrangement than it does to actually sew the collar. Now that used to be your stitching line for the center front. Here is now going to be your collar. That seam is now going to be placed in the center of the under collar, and we're going to stitch completely along our edge. What you have here is this being stitched. Now what I've done is I've placed my pins with the head sticking out. That way, if I happen to be sewing something on this side or this side, I can still pull the pins out, and I never want to sew over pins, especially with the computerized machines. They will bend a pin, break a needle, and throw the machine out of timing. So we start at one end, pull our pins out, and finish at the other end. Once you're done, you're going to trim your seam in half, trim your corner.
You really trimmed that corner.
I really trim the corner. Okay. And there is kind of a secret that check this angle here. That angle of your trimming needs to be further back so that it doesn't, when it folds to the inside, does not get kind of bent over. I'm going to just trim this off quickly, and I'm going to have you bring the point press over here.
Okay.
That piece of equipment that no one ever knew what to do with. One lady said, "Oh, I thought it was a doorstop for my sewing room." And because our seam is going to be pressed open and on top of itself, the point press. Okay, now have you hand me the yarn. And I would normally turn this around and do it the other way, but I want to show you the point turner.
You want to hand me the...
I will give you that.
The doorstop?
The doorstop. The point turner lays in your hand, and you want it to be the same length as your thumb, and you want to hold onto this tightly. Your thumb goes up inside. The point turner goes right to it. That is not a point poker. It's a point turner. And it gets flipped over all in one motion. So when your collar gets turned to the right side, here's your under collar. And because the under collar accidentally got thrown on the bias, it wants to roll that seam and favor it to the under collar. And I'm going to grab this guy one more time, give it a press, and now I'm going to show you how to put it underneath. Here we have no seam allowance right here. We're going to put it in our machine.
Can you read it so I can see?
Yep. And what you want to do, I'm going to show you how you're not going to get the spaghetti ball at the end. We want to hand walk this all the way to the end, pick up our presser foot, rotate this, put this behind. It now gives you traction for your corner. And so the corner does not go down inside the machine.
Okay.
What you have...
When you go down and veer around the corner on that front.
You're going to... This is exactly the same height as that.
Okay.
And when you've veered around the corner, you have nothing across the back as fabric. You have nothing down one side as fabric. So the machine just grinds and grinds and grinds. And a lot of times it gives you that thread, or it eats that corner, and the corner runs down in the oval part of the bed.
So you just put the other end
All
of the collar...
I did, because it's exactly the same width, it has taken the presser foot from here, it's raised it up, it's exactly the same level, and it'll just start sewing.
Now, Louise, that's a magic trick.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the, what do you refer to this as? The one seam collar?
It's the one seam collar. What you have is your straight grain on the front, your bias on the undercollar. You didn't do anything. It did it all by itself by removing these seams. And if you've ever done any kind of tailoring, always the undercollar is on the bias, so it rolls around the neck so much better. And that way you don't have any thickness. You can do very, very dimensional fabric, shall we say. Linens, wools, wool crepes can all be done this way because it takes out the bulk from the collar point.
Just another one of your magic Louise cutting tricks.
Thank you.
Louise, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And now Louise has some sewing inspirations to share with you. Louise, these are some of the most beautiful pieces. I'm just going to let you talk about the details because I just love your tailoring details.
Well, thank you. That this particular jacket has the collar I just showed, that it has no seam here, but it has some cool details in the back.
All right,
because you have to look as good going as you do coming. Underneath has the center back seam and the bias, because bias rolls so much prettier around the back of the neck. Has a deep yoke, and it runs right into the sleeve seam, and that's how a true tailored garment should be.
Now point that out one more time so they can see where the seam is.
It runs right down, right off the yoke into the two-piece sleeve. It should not be up here or down here. It really should come right off the yoke. And the next garment has a wonderful deep pleat in the front, and it's totally encased, so if you did do embroidery down the front, you don't see any of your mechanics. You don't see any of the stabilizer, that it's totally covered. And if the blouse blows open, you don't see you. And on the reverse of this, also has a real deep yoke, and into the seam, the two-piece sleeve, and it goes into a great finish placket so that it's all one piece. The next one is just, I love asymmetrical. That this one showcases a beautiful button or a pin, and underneath is totally buttoned. So again, you have a great playground if you're doing any kind of embroidery or embellishment down the front. It too has the collar. Underneath has a real pretty pleat in the back, and the wonderful thing about this particular blouse is it's longer in the back than the front, so that it covers up things in the back, it covers up things in the front, but the blouse is short enough so that if you're sitting at your sewing machine all day, or a computer, or in the car, the shortness in the front does not get caught in your seat belt or the seat wrinkles.
Louise, let's just look at one more. This is absolutely fabulous. I love this print. It's a heavy linen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. In fact, it's a home deck.
A home deck linen, like drapery.
Turn the back, and I'll show you what.
I will.
The left matches the right, which matches the yoke, which matches the collar.
Oh my goodness, that was good. Louise, thank you
You're
so
welcome.
very much. It's been wonderful having you with me today.
I'm so pleased to be here. Thanks, Martha.
And now we have some hand embroidery for you. I'm so happy to have as my guest today my very dear friend Wendy Schoen. Wendy owns Wendy Schoen's Designs and also Petit Crochet Patterns. Wendy is a frequent contributor to So Beautiful magazine, and she's studied and taught all over the world. My favorite place where she has studied needlework is the Royal School of Needlework in London. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. Always great to be here. I've brought with me some samples to show you. The first one is the little dress, and on the dress, at the top of the dress, of the yoke, are some little dots, and those little dots are called granito, which really means little grain, translated literally. So we're going to show you, I'm going to show you today how to make a granito. It's very simple to do. I like to, or choose to make my granitos without a hoop. You can make them in a hoop if you like, but they go a little bit faster, and I can control the way it looks better or easier. So therefore, that's why I choose it. Now, I've drawn a rather large circle here. Granitos are not quite this large. So, and I'm using 2 threads instead of 1, which I normally use 1, but for television purposes, I wanted you to make sure you could see everything I do. So let's go ahead and start. I'm going to tie on by sewing inside the white area. That means just inside the drawn line. Bring the thread tail down to almost through the fabric, just so that you have a little fuzzy end remaining. Now come back into the very center of the circle and sew right through that thread and the fabric, of course, and just slightly beyond on the bottom edge. Slightly beyond the original stitch, that is. Now, I want to hold the thread tail out of the way so that when I sew in at A and out at B, I don't pierce that thread. I know I pierced the one to tie on, but this is totally different. This is an actual stitch that you want to place on top of the fabric. So you want to make sure that it's nice and neat. Now, granito consists of approximately 8 to 10 stitches. They're all going to be stitched in and out the exact same 2 locations, A to B. So I'm going to stitch my first 4 stitches in the same A-B points, but I'm going to just let them fall as they want to fall. In other words, you don't have to worry about placing them in any particular way. Just stitch them any way you want. 4 stitches, those become my padding stitches. So you can think of those as your interior stitches. Now the next series of stitches will be my exterior stitches. They are still going to be stitched in the same A and B points, but these are going to be refined slightly. So I want those are going to show, so I want those to look the best. I'm going to go back into A and out at B again. And this time I want to focus on smoothing the top and rounding the edges, or widening the edges rather. Hold the thread to the side as you stitch so that when you pull it through, it actually remains there. Do this on both sides until it looks the way you want it to look. Now, I know I said between 8 and 10 stitches, but there is no law where granitos are concerned. The rule of thumb is the points between A and B, the farther they go, the more thread stitches you're going to need rather. And remember, you want to keep your thread tension nice and tight. I'm pretty sure mine is done, even though I've lost count. I hope you were counting along. So now I need to tie off. So what you want to look for before tying off is to make sure that the stitches on top are nice and smooth. You've kept your tension nice and tight, and now you want to bring your thread to the back. Rather than just throwing it down the opening at the top, I want to come across at the bottom and just bring it in at the side without sewing through your finger. Bringing it through the side like that so that it actually catches the threads on the back side. So let me show you what it looks like on the back. I'm going to turn this around. And you see how the needle is emerging through the mound? That's what you want to see. Bring the needle all the way through. And now all you need to do is tie it off. And I usually tie it off with a few little weaving stitches or trussing stitches, meaning they're coming in 2 different directions. Oh, that's tight. Let's see. Okay, there we go. And then you can go ahead and cut the tail or the end. Okay, so there's your completed granito. Now, granitos have a mind of their own. As when you place them on a garment, a life of their own rather. When you place them on a garment, it's a good idea to align your A-B points so that they're all going in the same direction. I usually like to put them with the grain of the fabric. So if the fabric grain lengthwise is going this way, I use those, that's the position of my A-B points. If they travel in a swirl or a pattern, I usually position my A-B points along the line that is drawn, along the design line, so that they actually travel in a pattern. And it makes them look nice and orderly and neat and pretty. And so that's really all there is to making a granito, Martha.
Well, thank you so much, and that is one of the nicest names. I just love knowing that you have taught our viewers and me how to make a granito.
Thank you, Martha.
Wendy, thank you so much for all of your beautiful things and your wonderful teaching. And now we have some quilting ideas to share with you. This little technique I'm going to show you today is one of my favorite techniques in the whole heirloom sewing repertoire of techniques. It's called Magic Madeira. And the reason it's magic is because we're going to use a wash-away basting thread to create this easy Madeira applique. Let's look at this beautiful Madeira quilt over here. Now this quilt, the base of this quilt is the pink fabric, this lighter pink. The base of the quilt is the lighter pink fabric in the full size. Now you can see this beautiful Madeira border that's around it. This is the darker pink, the Madeira border. And you might think, oh, you have to sew around there and then turn everything under. Wrong. I'm going to show you the easiest way in the world. This whole border is added to the square, the big square piece of pink fabric. Let me just show you this wonderful technique. It is just a favorite. All right, first of all, you're going to trace off the whole outline. As you can see here, this is a scallopy outline, and I've got the center marked. Now the critical part here, I'm going to sew, and I really am going to use a pretty short stitch so I can turn those corners perfectly. I'm going to sew with a wash-away basting thread. That's a water-soluble basting thread, in either the bobbin or the top, or actually in both. But the one thing, I'm going to tell you what to remember in just a minute. Okay, after you load up your wash-away basting thread, you're going to stitch carefully all the way around, completely around the design. At that point, after you stitch with your wash-away basting thread, remove, and I emphasize, remove the wash-away basting thread from your sewing machine, from the bobbin, the top, or both, wherever you use it. That is going to go away. Go ahead and load your sewing machine back up with regular thread. Then you're going to cut away, leaving a seam allowance. I think this is about a 1/8 inch seam allowance, leaving about a 1/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to finish. I've already done a little bit of the cutting, as you can see. For the magic of television, it'll go a little bit faster. I trim that away, and I do just some little clips that don't go all the way over to the line, but just, you do need to clip those curves just a little bit. I'm not going to clip too much more. Now what I'm going to do next is to turn this right side out, this whole piece, turn it right side out, and then I'm going to press with a dry iron. I'm not going to fold that completely, but turn it right side out, and I'm going to press it very carefully and push all the points in, and I'm going to press it with a dry iron where it really, really looks good. I've gotten all the points. Now the next step is going to be to take starch, and I'm not going to spray starch, but I'm going to wet it all the way around really quickly. I'm going to wet this whole line right here, and you can guess that's going to dissolve the wash-away basting thread. I'm going to spray starch it, and then I'm going to, with a dry iron, press till dry. Don't go back and forth, just press. Don't iron, just press. Press till dry, press till dry. Press till dry, or you will cry. I mean, it has to be bone dry. Do not use any steam. Make it bone dry. Then, after it kind of cools, you're going to simply go in here and you're going to pull it apart. And as I pull it apart, you're going to see a beautiful Madeira piece. Let me show you then what we do. We put it on the whole quilt. You have your beautiful Madeira border. I'm going to pin it to the whole quilt, and then I'm going to do a Madeira applique stitch or a pin stitch. I have another one. I'm going to do the Madeira applique or the pin stitch to attach this beautifully finished piece to my quilt. And I have that, and then I will pin it very carefully to go ahead and finish the edge of the quilt. And that is how easy it is to do wash-away basting thread Madeira. And now won't you join me as I share a piece from my vintage collection with you? This dress has such an interesting story, not the dress specifically, but this type of dress. The first thing I would like to point out is that the scooped neckline and the short sleeves, and by the way, this dress originally would have had a drawstring in there to have pulled it up a little tighter, but the drawstring is gone. Okay, the scooped neckline and the short sleeves means the dress was probably, anywhere from 1850 to 1880. There's a little piece of French lace. Now, this dress is called Indian Ayrshire. The Ayrshire dresses that were made in Scotland were very hard to come by, and the work was extremely difficult to do, so the English began to send, I'm going to come down the skirt so you can see, they began to send their work to India, and the Indian ladies began to reproduce it, and it was called Indian Ayrshire, and as you can see, the work is a little heavier than the original Ayrshire embroidery, which was done mostly by the nuns in England, but it is still extremely, extremely beautiful. I absolutely love the way the Indian Ayrshire looks. I'm going to turn it over just to show you one more interesting thing about this dress. The dress was open in the back. Now, there are a number of christening dresses today that are made that way, but very few in my extensive collection have that complete opening in the back. thank you for joining me today. I hope you've had as much fun as I've had, and I invite you to come back next time.